During the debate that Keir Starmer had with Rishi Sunak, they talked about the National Health Service, and Keir Starmer was quite definite that he wouldn't use anything but the National Health Service, and he would certainly not go for private health care for any reason. This is very principled of him. And you do get a lot of people who can't really see 2 steps ahead of themselves bawling down the telephone in radio phone-ins about rich people using private healthcare, and so, I don't know what, somehow robbing the NHS, without considering the possibility that rich people pay taxes which pay for the NHS, and then they don't use it, which I would consider unfair in other circumstances, but in this case, because I support the NHS myself, I agree that that's a good idea. If you're rich enough to afford the little extra, my belief is you should be able to use it. And those people shouting down the phone about rich people, or Keir Starmer indeed, don't seem to have got the idea. If a private patient is in a private hospital, then that private patient is not taking up room in an NHS hospital, which leaves more room for, well, what do you think? The sort of person shouting down the phone at the phone-in host, or the illegal migrants that are overloading our systems so thoroughly recently? Well, that's another subject. I'm Granniopteryx. Now, chicken or egg? Are socialists the sort of people who can't learn from history and that's why they're socialists? Or do they stop learning from history when they become socialists? I have never worked that out, but it's an interesting question. You see, I saw this. We won't use private healthcare, say Labour shadow ministers, which means that when Labour shadow ministers have to go into hospital for treatment, then they're going to access the NHS in a show of solidarity with what they assume are the working classes, which is a class of people they abandoned about 20 years ago. However, that reminded me of a story my father told me. I was in America at the time. There was a Labour government in power, and one of the ministers needed an operation. And so, being a good socialist, he was going to use the NHS, which he did. So he went into an NHS ward like everyone else, and then of course there were police around. The ministers kept coming with papers for him to look at, ministers, secretaries, officials of various sorts. And the other people in the ward started to complain about this constant traffic of individuals and police and all the rest of it tramping about in the public ward. So finally they had to quietly move him into a side ward. But this was still an NHS hospital. So what was happening was that this man was taking up this minister was taking up a side ward, which is usually reserved for the most serious cases. People who really can't be around other people in the ward for sickness, or because they're dying perhaps, or other reasons they can't be in a public ward. So it was a complete mess. If he'd have gone to a private hospital, then that bed in the public ward wouldn't have been subject to that sort of disruption, and the private ward, the private room at the side of the ward, wouldn't have been taken. And yet they haven't learnt from this. Right, and this is a direct question that was asked during the debate. I have to confess, I just watched bits of it. I did start to watch the whole thing, but it's just one set of fake statistics after the other, and I just couldn't stand it anymore. Anyway, but there was this direct question.
If you had loved ones on a long waiting list for surgery, would you, if you felt that that was the only way forward, use private healthcare? Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
Keir Starmer.
No.
Absolutely no if your loved one was on a waiting list for surgery.
No.
Thank you very much.
I don't use private health.
Okay.
I use the NHS. That's where my wife works, in one of the big hospitals. As I say, it runs through my DNA.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
you. If you had...
Okay. Look, I know this is an unworthy thought, but it just occurred to me that if you have a wife who actually works in a hospital, then it's a lot easier to get appointments after hours. Maybe I'm just being a little bit churlish here. But even outside of that, if he can afford it, why not? It reminded me a little bit of this particular thing. This guy here is Roger Hallam. This fellow here on the right. I'm sorry, the recording thing I'm using doesn't record the mouse clicks. So, the person on the right here is Roger Hallam, and he was at the time the Insulate Britain. I think he's now moved to Just Stop Oil, and I don't remember the name of this interviewer. But at the time, Insulate Britain were blocking roads, and there was one instance where an ambulance taking a woman to hospital, she just had a stroke, and her son was holding her hand in the ambulance and watching her slip away. I don't know what happened to her, but I'm quite sure she was far more damaged than if she'd got to hospital half an hour earlier or 2 hours earlier. I think they were stuck in that ambulance for 2 or 3 hours. Okay, so listen to this and look at Mr. Hallam's eyes while he's talking.
In that circumstance, what would you do?
I'd stay there.
You would?
Yeah.
And if it were an ambulance and there was someone that could potentially die in there, would you stay there?
Yeah.
That's the voice of a fanatic. And Keir Starmer, he was saying the same things. He didn't have quite the wild eyes of Roger Hallam, but still, it's a triumph of idealism over humanity, isn't it? But there is hope for us all, because as Andrew Bridgen said, Starmer rarely sticks to his principles. Well, rarely sticks to anything he says. Whether or not he has principles is another matter. So this is Andrew Bridgen's compilation. Well done, Mr. Bridgen. You did a good job here.
To pay tribute to Jeremy Corbyn, who's a friend as well as a colleague.
You wouldn't call Jeremy Corbyn a friend?
No. We have to make the case for freedom of movement. We don't want open borders. Freedom of movement has gone and it's not coming back.
Can you guarantee that under your leadership, the 2019 Labour commitments to nationalise water, energy, rail, the Royal Mail, they'll all be in Labour's next election manifesto?
I've made that commitment.
Will you nationalise the big six energy companies, yes or no?
No.
No, you will not.
The Labour Party in opposition needs to be the Labour Party in power, and a government doesn't go on picket lines. A government tries to resolve disputes. I'm really pleased to be here this morning supporting the staff at McDonald's who are on strike. Air quality, climate change is the issue of our time, and as the Extinction Rebellion protest showed us this week, the next generation are not going to forgive us if we don't take action. I think they're wrong. I think their action is wrong.
So that's Keir Starmer, which means that there's always hope. This is a man who will change his mind at the flick of a switch, so we never know about the private healthcare thing either. But the fact that it's a principle now after they must have learnt the lessons, or they should have learnt the lessons of the past, and they haven't. It's playing to the sort of knotty left who put idealism over humanity all the time. And, well, yeah, you know, I don't have much hope for the Labour Party and for the country once they get hold of it. Okay, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.